is James here with the Oracle Outlook for the week starting April the 6th, 2020. Thanks so much for tuning in and joining me for this week's video reading. I am so happy you are here. This week I'm honoring the request of one of my viewers. Over the course of the last week, I was asked to work with Gypsy cards just a bit more, but there was something specific in the request. So if you remember, last week I worked with my favorite set of Gypsy cards, and that is the retro Gypsy cards. And so the request was asking me to work with a specific brand. So there is a brand of Gypsy cards by Piotnik. So I will be working with that deck specifically. So again, I'm working with Gypsy cards, but instead of the retro Gypsy cards, I am working with the Piotnik Gypsy cards. So as always, I will be leaving information about the deck in the description box below. And so now that I've set things up, let's get to the table and see what the Piotnik Gypsy cards have to say about the week ahead. And here we are with the cards on the table, and I'm going to take a few moments to shuffle the deck. And as I shuffle, I'm focusing on my usual intention for these weekly general readings. And that is for the information, for the insight, and for any guidance and advice to come through the cards that is going to be most helpful and beneficial as we move through the upcoming week. So I'm shuffling that into the cards. And I'm just waiting to feel led and guided to stop. Alright, so I'm going to stop there. And now I'm going to go ahead and cut the deck. Now fan the cards out. And I'm looking for 5 cards in the fan that are getting my attention, because I'm continuing to work with lines of 5s. Alright, so I've picked the 5 cards. I'm going to take the remainder of the deck up. I'm going to move that to one side. Normally I would count back, but I don't need to do that. I can clearly see I have 5 cards there, so I'm just going to put them in the order that they were selected. And now I'm going to lay them out. And I'm just going to put them in a line from left to right in the order that they were selected. Alright. So when I work with Gypsy cards, I tend to read them like Lenormand in this sense, that I start with the middle card, and the middle card always tells me what the central issue is or what we're being asked to focus on for the week ahead. So taking a look at that card, we have the Some Money card. Okay, so this is a card where we are focusing on financial transactions. Some Money for me is a card about money changing hands. And so what I love about Gypsy cards is that I tend to work with the imagery on the card. So the first thing that sticks out to me is the table with the money on it. Sometimes this is about household finances. And so we are being asked to take a look at maybe the changes that are taking place within our finances in terms of households. And that could be like paying bills, expenses, things like that. Because the table symbolically for me represents activity, and then we have areas where there's change on the table. So for me, that's a pun for changes, right? So for some of us, we are focusing on changes with our finances in regards to household accounts, household expenses, things like that. Now, the other thing that gets me in terms of my attention is the fact that there's a mirror on the wall. So for me, the mirror symbolically can represent a time of reflection or self-reflection. So someone may be experiencing either something having to do with their image or sense of identity in relation to their ability to make money or their ability to pay their own way or to pay their expenses, things like that. Because the mirror is above the table, and I'm just going on that there's a connection there, right? Because they each are in the same space together, right? Now I'm also seeing that someone may feel inclined to pull back the curtain. I'm noticing the curtain on the left of the card that's making me feel like it may be time to pull back the curtain and reveal something about oneself. And maybe it has to do with either changes that they are actively working on. That would be the table and the change on the table, right? The table can represent activity and work, like I've already said, right? So there may be something about pulling back the curtain and revealing something about yourself. That would be the mirror, in relation to something that you are actively working on regarding to making some change. And as I'm saying that, this card is making me feel like this is a time to focus on some kind of improvement. So now it could be improvement within a space in your home, or this could be about improving something regarding your image or identity, right? And then the one last thing that's getting my attention in this card is the chair. So the chair could represent a position on something, right? So this could be about a change in position, like you held a particular position in regard to a subject or a situation, and this card may be suggesting that you are now changing your position, right? And then the last thing that's coming to me is that the chair can also be a pun for a chairperson, like, you know, chairing something, chairing a committee, chairing a group. So there may be something having to do with either change or finances, like somebody's heading that up or chairing that committee and focusing on making some kind of improvements. So again, for me, some money, generally speaking, can represent some kind of focus on financial activity or making changes or experiencing changes with one's financial picture. And it usually has to do with household accounts, you know, household expenses, things like that. So that is some money. So now let's take a look at the surrounding cards because they will give us more information possibly about this central issue or focus. So the card opening up the line on the far left we have, okay, so here we have the death card. So for me, the death card usually represents something coming to some form of completion or something being ended, right? For me, that is the keywords that I have for the death card. So now interesting, if we read order of the cards, the death card is coming before this card. So there may be some sort of change that precipitates needing to make some improvements or focusing on changes within our finances. There may be something that's coming to an end or some sort of completion that leads to that. Now, I'm also looking at the image, and the skeletal figure is holding an hourglass. For me, that symbolically represents something having to do with time or timing, right? So it could just be, it's a matter of time that we are here and we have to get to here. So there may be something about if somebody's focusing on needing to focus on financial activity or making some improvements regarding their financial picture, this card is saying that time hasn't run out yet. There's still time, right? But at some point, you're going to get here, right? So that's what I'm seeing with the death card. In and of itself, the death card usually represents something coming to an end, needing to complete something, something being finalized. And it could be, as I'm talking about this out loud, somebody may be finalizing or in the stage of finalizing something having to do with improving one's financial picture. So that's what I'm seeing with the two cards. So now let's take a look at the card in the middle between death and some money. And here we have the sadness card. So sadness is a card for me that talks about upset. It talks about disappointment, right? Because the woman on the card has her head down. And as a result of this, she's facing the death card. So it could be, remember, order of the card. So here we have the ending and completion of a cycle. It may lead to some upset or disappointment going from left to right. And then as a result of that, then we get to a place where we may need to focus on some kind of improvement or making some kind of changes, that kind of thing. But again, sadness is a card that can represent upset and disappointment. But again, I'm going to go with the idea I'm reading the directional cue and that the woman is facing the skeletal figure, right? So this is happening as a result of this, right? So there may be something coming to an end, and we may express some sadness, disappointment, or upset with this change, with this ending, with this stage of completion. And at some point, we're going to have to move on to making some changes, focusing on improving things, or the change has to do with our finances, but these are all tied up, when I say tied up, I mean connected, right? So there's that. So now let's take a look at what's going on the other side of some money. And here we have the thought card. Okay, so when the thought card comes up, this can be about like pondering something, meditating on something, giving something some thought or consideration. The man on the card is in a pensive state or position, right? So for me, when this card comes up, it can represent thinking and planning, right? So the cards are telling us a story, and here's the story. So here we have, opening the lineup, we have something coming to an end or something being completed, right? This could even be, maybe someone facing some kind of termination. And if we go with what's going on in the larger collective, right, we know that there are people who are losing income, right, due to job loss, right? So let's say that people are being terminated. The natural reaction as a result of being terminated would be upset, sadness, disappointment. And then that leads to a focus on what do we do with our finances, because we still have things that need to be paid around the house. We still have our household expenses, things like that, right? And some people, as a result, being in an emotional state, they may get here with the mirror. Remember, the mirror is all about how we see ourselves, right? Our image, our sense of identity. And if people are heavily identified by their work and for whatever reason they lose their job, well, that would make sense, right? But as a result of this, here we're focusing on our financial picture, household expenses, household accounts, things like that. Then we have to give some thought to that and come up with a plan to move that forward. Remember, thought is about thinking and planning, right? It could also be a need to do some research and analysis, right? So that is thought, right? And now the card at the end of the line, here we have letter. So remember, letter was a card that showed up in last week's Gypsy card reading, right? And so letter can represent forms of communication. In the image here, we have a dove or a pigeon who's bringing in a letter, right? So this is, messages coming in, the arrival of something. So this could be news on the way, and it could be something that, as a result of the plan we put into action, we get some sort of notification. I'm going with the idea that the letter could actually be written forms of communication, like I talked about last week. Just could be paperwork, documentation, things like that. Now, going with what's going on in the collective, this could also be about people being on the receiving end. This is the end of the line. So this is being on the receiving end, right? And if we go one step further, the dove or the pigeon descending with the letter in its beak or bill is coming towards the man, right? So this could be about people being on the receiving end of something that's going to help with their financial picture. And it's making me feel like what the government is wanting to do. And again, I'm talking about the government here in the United States because I'm in the United States, about the stimulus, about helping people who are dealing with maybe job loss or job termination, right? So there may be people who are involved in that process who may be on the receiving end of that law, that bill that's been recently passed. So that's what I'm seeing. But on the end here, regardless, this is about news or messages on the way, something arriving, and that could be snail mail, that could be emails, texts, written communication, written documentation, but it could also be, verbal communication too as well, because letter for me, again, rules all types of communication. I would say if I go with the directional cue and the man with his back to this, sometimes I read this as a person who is sending a message, right? So we have to be mindful. I'll read this two ways. This week we have to be mindful of the messages we send out and the messages that come in, right? So on that note, I will go ahead and end this week's Oracle Outlook reading here. I am James Himm Mitchell, and as I close, I'd like to thank you for sharing space here with me in this week's reading, and I look forward to sharing the same space with you again in our next video reading together. So until then, I'm hoping that you have the best of days possible, and I hope that you have the best week possible. Take care.